Hey there, how's it going? And welcome back to our vibe coding project. So when we last left off, we had a working project. It successfully took our original audio file, translated it, and then generated audio files in English and Japanese, and then combined them in the right order. So we got our study files. However, we did run into some issues around how fast the audio files were being generated. And even though the quality was high, it's going to turn into kind of an expensive project, but really the most important thing for me is that it's just really slow. And also we wanted a way to save the API keys, because if you recall in the last video, I was having to input them every single time, copy and paste them into the front end of the application. And so that was pretty annoying. What we want now is one, to be able to save these API keys, because again, this project is going to be local. You'll be able to download it. And so it doesn't really make sense for the keys to not be saved. It's going to live on your computer. So now let's just add a couple of notes here for myself just to remember. So just trying to remember from the last video, we were going to add a cheaper or ideally a free option for the text-to-speech using either the operating system's text-to-speech solution, or because the project does live in the browser, we can actually now do that in the browser using the text-to-speech APIs available for us there. And then we also wanted a way to save the API keys. So unless I'm mistaken, those were basically the only two things that were remaining before we could upload this to GitHub. So you could then download it yourself and then build on it and modify it and do whatever you want with it. So let me go ahead and just open it up here so you can see it's running here. This is what it currently looks like. We've got this section here with our API configuration, and this is where I was having to input the keys every single time that I was testing it, and that's what was getting annoying. So ideally what we want to do is this whole section right here is put it somewhere behind a settings window or panel or whatever. And this is also where we might want to add the toggle for either the high definition audio files that are being generated using the AI model, or using the operating system's built-in text-to-speech or the browser's text-to-speech. We'll probably just stick to the browser's text-to-speech. I think that's what I used last time, and it was pretty good. So super fast, and it's free because it's just using what is available to the browser. So let's do that now. Okay, so now we are back in Cursor, and as you can see, our little Flask app is running right here, and that's how we were able to access it locally. So let's update this. Now, remember that we have a bunch of different files that we use to manage the project. The main ones being the PRD and the tasks.md. So PRD is the description. Tasks are just the list of all the things the AI is going to need to do to have the application ready for us to use. So if we want to make any changes, the best way to approach it is to go back to the PRD, ask the AI to update it based on the new specifications, and then move on to the tasks and then update those as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I just went ahead and dictated a bit of a description here. What I just explained, I'm asking the model to first allow the user to choose between the API text-to-speech, the high quality version, and using the browser's built-in API for text-to-speech. I'm also telling it to set up a settings section where we'll have the API configuration. So it's not always on the home page of our application. And this is also where we'll have the toggle to choose between the high quality text-to-speech and the local quality text-to-speech. And finally, I'm just telling it to edit the PRD file first and then update the tasks file based on the new requirements. And for this video, we're just going to continue using Claude 4 Sonnet. So there, and off it goes. All right, and it appears to be done. I also went ahead and got some water, and that's how I managed to spill this on myself, just because I'm so well coordinated. So let's take a look at all the different things that it's done and see if we're okay with the changes. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at the PRD file. Let's see what the changes are. Okay, and so there's a change here in the audio processing pipeline, text-to-speech, and so it's updated and added a high quality mode and a local mode, which uses the browser's built-in web speech API. So that looks good. Now it's added a section here in external APIs. And so it's added this section here, the browser web speech API. Then it's also updated the data flow, because now it's going to check whether we want the high quality audio or the local quality version. It's also updated the plan for the main page. There's a settings button section, collapsible or modal. We'll see what it chooses. And here we go. This is where it's added the settings section. So it's got the API configuration, which is what we want, the different text-to-speech options, and also some audio settings, which is not what we asked for, but that's nice. So let's see, pause duration between sentences, audio, output audio format preferences. Okay, that's not what we specified, but that seems fine. And so far, we haven't really run into any major problems. So I'm pretty confident the AI model we'll be able to handle these additional complexities. And then down here on the front end section, again, it's adding details about the web audio API that we're going to be using and local storage API for settings persistence. All right, so let's move on to the tasks.md just to make sure it's all good. In phase 2, it's talking about dual text-to-speech service. It's interesting that it's marking it as complete, or rather it just updated the description, but it left it as complete, which is not the case because we have not added any code for the browser speech API. And then it's also gone ahead and updated the front end section with a couple more tasks related to the settings section and where we're going to input the API key and then adding the toggle for choosing between the different qualities. So now let's go ahead and keep all these changes. And I'm going to manually uncheck this one because that is not true. And now I'll just ask it to continue with phase 2, but to make sure that it completes this part right here, because it's very crucial that it doesn't think that it's already implemented both of the different text-to-speech services when it has only implemented the one. Continue with phase 2. Make sure that you actually implement the browser speech API part of the task because you only have the OpenAI API part complete. Right, and off it goes. And I just asked it to continue with phase 2 and to make sure that it actually does this part right here because it only currently has implemented the OpenAI API part of the task. All right, and it appears to be done. So let's take a look at what all the changes it made were. So it added the browser text-to-speech service file. This is basically the file that coordinates the browser API for text-to-speech. It's updated the interface, processing service, enhanced Flask application. What is this? Okay, so just adding the browser text-to-speech to it. And then finally, it updated the documentation. Okay, so far so good. Next steps, phase 3. Let's see. So like a good vibe coder, we're just going to keep all the changes and we're just going to let it continue with phase 3. And then I think we'll be able to test it. So let's let it do its thing. And that's something I've noticed with a lot of these different AI models and vibe coding in general is that even though some of the supposed intelligence of these different models is comparable, they do differ on certain tasks, the ability to use tools within the IDE, or how strictly they'll adhere to your instructions. Some of these models, for example, the ones that Anthropic produces, all the Claude models, tend to be a little bit more creative when it comes to taking your instructions and then adding a little bit extra, a little bit of maybe some things you didn't quite ask for, but are sometimes nice. Whereas some of the other models that I've used to code things like the Google models, so the Gemini models tend to be much more strict about doing just exactly what you're asking them to do. And so that's something that you get a sense for how it's almost like the different personalities of these models. Some of them are going to be assistants that are just going to do exactly what you ask them to and no more. And others will take very vague instructions and build an entire project out of them. So part of coding with AI tools is getting to know them, their personalities, and which ones you can depend on for certain types of activities, which ones you need to watch more closely and review the code more closely. But that's probably a video on its own. So we'll just leave it at that for now. All right. And so it is just now wrapping up phase 3. So let's take a quick look at what it's done. So it added the settings modal system, updated the settings management. So now we have local storage persistence. Our API keys should now be stored and we won't have to input them every single time. And then it's talking about the browser text-to-speech integration and a bunch of other things that are related to adding the browser text-to-speech. So now it's ready for testing. We're going to keep all the changes just like last time. And now we're going to open up our project again. As you can see, the place where we input our API keys is now gone. And we have this new settings toggle here. I think, yeah, it's a white font on a clear background, so we can't see that, but it works. So very nice. Let's click on that. And we get a little modal here. Here's where we enter our API keys. And we've got our 2 options. So it also lets us now choose the different voices provided by the OpenAI API. And here's that pause between seconds option that it gave us. And let's just switch over to local browser for a second. So we've got a couple more settings when we switch it over to the local browser. Speech rate, speech pitch, and speech volume. I'm very curious about this. So let's first not add our keys. We're just going to save the settings. And we're going to use our test audio file just to see what happens. So I'm going to drag and drop it in here. That's right. But we do need the Anthropic key for the translation. So let's add that right now. And I will save, and let's just for a second refresh. And there we go. So we've got persistence with local storage. So we don't have to input our API keys in every single time. Now I'm going to add the test file. So we'll be able to translate it with the Anthropic API. And, oh, no, we got another error. API keys are required. Let's take a look if I'm missing any settings. Okay. Now, unless we're using OpenAI's API for something, and I can't remember, that might be the case. I'm just going to go ahead and add them, and we'll test that, and then we'll just double check later. And we've added the OpenAI API key. And once again, let's give it another go. I'm not going to save it. So yeah, it seems we're probably using the OpenAI API for one of these steps, and it's just not giving us an error on which specific step it's using. And I actually just remembered, well, it's obvious that it needs both because we're using the OpenAI API to actually transcribe the audio. So without that, it's not able to generate the text file that it then uses to translate in the rest of the steps. So you're going to need both anyway. So one additional update that might be nice is if we had a timer, not only covering the entire process, but also each individual step, just to kind of give us an idea and benchmark how long certain steps take. Because right now it's taking quite a while to transcribe the audio. I don't know if that's just normal and that's how fast it can go, or if there's a way to maybe break up the audio file into little chunks, do some sort of parallel transcribing and then stitch them together and cut the time down or something like that. But without any way to know how long this is taking, it's kind of hard to tell if we want to then make some additional improvements. So that's probably something for a future video or something that you might try to do once we upload this to GitHub. All right, so it ran into a couple of issues. It was just taking a really long time at the transcription phase, and I asked the model to just check to see if this is normal or if there's possibly an issue somewhere. And it set up a bunch of debugging, and it detected some sort of an issue. I just let it fix everything on its own. So we're just going to try it once more. All right, and again, we were running into some issues. It appears we're running different processes on the same port. We're trying to do so, and so the application was just unable to handle that. So we just kind of killed everything, restarted it, and here we are. So now let's look at the settings once more just to make sure everything's in its place. And unfortunately, it seems it did not save our keys. So either something in the code that handles this changed and that's why they're gone, or it just did not store them in the first place. So we will have to take a look at that. Let's see if we can't just get it to run once, and then we'll fix some of these issues. All right, so added the keys, and now adding our audio file and uploading and processing. Let's see if we have better luck this time. All right, and it's actually moved on from transcribing the audio. That was much, much faster, not even about a minute. So it seems to have fixed that. And now in Cursor, we can take a look at what's actually happening here. It also added a little bit of logging. So for example, we can see that the transcription process actually took about 36 seconds. So that's what it should have been the first time around, which is actually really fast. This audio is around 10 minutes long. So 36 seconds for the transcription, I feel, is pretty quick. Okay, now taking it over to the translation service here, we can see it's batching up the sentences into 39 chunks and sending those to Anthropic for translation. And we can see the same thing reflected on the front end. And it just completed the 192 translation. I'm guessing that's 192 sentences in the 39 batches. So you double that to get 384 strings that it's going to need to generate audio for, and here it goes. So unfortunately, it seems to be using the OpenAI text-to-speech. Let me just switch over to the front end of our application to see if that's what we had set up. Oh, and it was. Okay, so anyway, we'll be able to compare these at least. We could consider this the test for the high quality, and then in a moment, we'll do the one using the browser API. Well, in a bit more than a moment, we're at 40 of 384 pieces of audio that it's going to have to generate. So I will go get another glass of water while I wait and let it do its thing. All right, and it finally finished. It took quite a while, so I'm glad I decided to browse the internet while I waited a little bit. Like I said, we should probably add some logging to this to know exactly how long it took. Well, let's just say it took minutes. All right, and we are done. So 192 sentences. This time we got 100% translation success. I don't know if you remember the last video, we got less than that. And that was very strange. I'm not quite sure what that meant. I guess it's just the number of chunks that it was sending to Anthropic failed. I would imagine they would then retry them. Otherwise, we would have a problem. But anyway, let's download these and just make sure that they are as we expect. And then we can finally test the local text-to-speech. And the file sizes match, 17 minutes. It's not going to be exactly double what the original audio file was because there were natural pauses and things that this is not going to have because all the speech is generated, and that's why we get 17, almost 18 minutes. So far, so good. Now comes the real test. We're going to switch over to local browser. We're just going to leave the defaults here, speech rate 1, speech pitch 1, and speech volume 1. Save settings, and we're just going to let this run again with the same audio file. And actually, let's refresh this. Check the settings. Keys are there. Local browser. All right. Now we drop in the audio file and let's give it another go. And we actually ran into an issue. So the audio processing step failed. Let's go into Cursor and figure out what actually happened. And we're just going to let the AI do its thing and trying to figure out where the issue is. So it seems that it found the issue. There was some sort of a mismatch here between the instructions we were sending and what was being generated. So it just went ahead and fixed them, and I've just restarted the process again, and we'll see if this time it gets it right. So we ran into a bit of an issue. Essentially, once we got to the step of generating the audio files, what happened was that it was starting to generate them, but it's also playing them through my speakers instead of just silently generating the files. And there's no clear way of stopping that unless we kill the program. Another thing that I noticed as it started to play is that the audio quality is pretty bad, or rather the speech generation is pretty bad. Now I know we're using the browser's built-in API, but when I had done this before, it wasn't quite as bad. It literally sounded like Stephen Hawking's voice. So I know there's something wrong. So while that was happening and I was hearing this very robotic and terrible English and Japanese audio, I made this little prompt in Claude because I was looking up the Chrome text-to-speech API. I'm sure that it's more advanced than what I was hearing. There's just no way it can be that bad. So I suggested to build me this little thing right here where I could test the different voices. And sure enough, there are some that are much better and some that are really terrible. So that also led me to ask the AI to add a drop down so we could let the user actually pick from all the different voices because some are pretty bad and some are pretty decent. And I think that would actually solve the issue. And then one final instruction I gave it is that if we have generated things like the parse sentences or we have the translations for a file and it detects that the MP3 file has the same name and the same length, we would just reutilize that. Now, that's obviously not the best idea because you might be taking a bunch of different files that have the exact same name and just trying to process all of them. So this would not work. But in my case, I'm just doing one at a time and they're all going to have different file names and different lengths. So it's very unlikely that this would ever hit a false positive. And we would reuse some of the parts like the translation or the raw output. And basically, I just did that to save time because some of these processes do take a bit of time and I'm just doing the exact same thing over and over to be able to test just the final text-to-speech step. All right, and it's actually finished while I was talking, so let's give it another try. All right, so now we're just running it once more, and if we open up the settings and we have local browser for the text-to-speech, we now get the drop-down to choose the different voices. And so I picked a better one for the Japanese and also a better one for the English as well. So let's just save our settings and try it once more, and we'll also see if it's actually going to reutilize some of the raw translations or the transcript of the audio file. So we'll see if it detects it and maybe saves us a little bit of time, especially with the testing. All right, it seems it's not actually going to reutilize anything because it just now set up the cache in this last batch of updates. So after this first time, we should be able to reutilize the raw transcript or the translation if we get to that step and just test the text-to-speech if we make any changes moving forward. And in the meantime, we're just going to jump into the tasks and see what we've got. I just wanted to complete these two. And then I'm going to make some notes for version 3 while the current test is still running because all we've got is time now. So let's just make sure we capture this for the next version. Or if maybe you'd like to try and make some of these changes yourself, because today we are actually uploading it to GitHub where you'll be able to download the project, install it, and tweak it. All right, so we ran into another little snag. Essentially, it was still playing the audio as it was generating the text-to-speech in the browser, and we asked it not to do that. So tried to find a different way to fix that. But while it was doing that, I looked for another way to see if we could generate the text-to-speech that wasn't quite as bad as the API that's in the browser, but obviously not as expensive as using OpenAI's API. And I remember that there is one. It's the Google text-to-speech, which uses the Google Translate audio generation endpoint. And it is a Python library, so I asked it to also implement that as a third option. So that's exactly what it's doing right now, and we'll test it in just a moment. I have a feeling it's going to be much better than the browser's built-in text-to-speech, but it's still free, so it's going to be really good. All right, and now we're at the processing stage where we're just combining the audio files, and there we go. It all seemed to work. This time, what I did was I switched over to Google Translate. There was an issue where I had selected it, and for some reason, it was still sounding very robotic. It was actually a mistake with the code. It was defaulting to the local browser API. So it found the issue, it updated. Also, I asked it to fix the caching. It changed something about how the caching detected the current file that was being uploaded. And so it fixed it. And now the caching is working. So great. That allows us to test changes even more quickly. And so this last test was super fast. It was using the previous translation. And the only additional time we had to wait was for it to use the Google TTS. So now the moment of truth, let's download these two files and see what we've got. As you can tell, I was waiting for quite a while because I even opened up Reddit while I was waiting. So let's see here.
For Japanese content. Although it sounds like a child's, not a child's voice at all.
This version sounds
like a child's voice.
Much, much better. And it was really, really fast too. So I like that. Let's make this the default option so you don't have to spend any other money other than for the transcription and translation. And then we'll just use this free Google text-to-speech library, their API. And that should be it. It's really fast, so I'm quite enjoying that. One last bug I would like to fix is that when I click download, so when I click this right here, it actually downloads the same file twice, and I'm not sure why. We'll just change that. It's probably a very simple bug. And then that should be it. We'll just upload it to GitHub, where you can play with it and use it yourself. So there we go. We're just making these last final changes in Cursor, and that should be it. And in a moment, we'll just upload it to GitHub. All right, and I just ran a test once more. By default, the Google Translate option is selected, and also we are using the cache, so that's why it skipped everything and went straight to generating the speech because we don't actually store the audio files. The only thing we store are the transcription and translation because those are basically free. They're tiny little, less than a megabyte each. Storing all the audio, we could do that, but we're not going to do that by default, and that's why it's skipping over everything and going straight to generating the speech. And then we'll also check if when I click download, if it duplicates the file. If that's fixed, then I think it's pretty much it. The last thing I would also like to change is this settings text color. But other than that, I think we're good. All right, and it just finished. So I tested it once more, and this time it didn't download a duplicate. Okay, then the last change is just, like I said, this settings text, which is white on a clear background. Can't read that. Let's just change that. All right, and there we go. It's been published now to GitHub. I just did a little bit of final wrangling there and cleaning up. There's some weird issues in the README. It's not 100% accurate, but it's good enough to get you to start using it. There's a lot of emojis and a lot of extra fluff in here. But anyway, pretty simple. So I will add the link in the description. You can copy this and modify it. Maybe make a pull request or just use it for yourself. So I think that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. We'll probably start up a new project. I think we spent enough time on this podcast translator. It works. There are obviously improvements we could make. To go back to the list of things that I want to do, I want to add bulk processing, so you could add a bunch of MP3 files and just have the system process them one after the other. Also, the local previews for the different voices if you want to use the browser text-to-speech, although honestly, the Google text-to-speech is pretty good, so I don't think you want to do that. And then the option to only use one AI, because right now we're using Anthropic for translation and OpenAI for the transcription. And I believe the sentence parsing as well. And then one final thing that I actually just realized, it only works from Japanese MP3s to English. That's probably a very easy fix. And then we would add a toggle in the settings just to choose which language do you want to translate into. What language are you studying? So if anyone wants to take that up and just try their hand at vibe coding, that would actually be a pretty good first thing to try. Or if anybody wants me to do it because you want to use it and you're not studying Japanese, let me know in the comments and I will do it. So I'll see you in the next video.